Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm Joan Kerr and we're glad to have you all with us here this afternoon. We invite you to come to these live shows if you possibly can, or catch them later on UITV, YouTube, iTunes, and the IP website, which is international.uiowa.edu. You can find information about upcoming shows and links to archived programs, and you can learn more about this space we tape in, which is Film Scene in Iowa City. And you can find out more about Film Scene at icfilmscene.org. Our topic tonight for WorldCanvass is gender and identity, and we hope to shed a little light on the complex cultural, personal, societal, and political aspects of terms we often hear used but may not fully understand, terms like gender and gender identity, sexuality and sexual orientation, LGBTQ, transgender, queer, transsexual. All of these words represent categories. They're used to sort out like types in the vast spectrum of humanity, and they can refer to physical attributes, to sexual preferences, or to psychological affinities that may or may not match up with society's expectations of male and female traits and behaviors. Our guests in this first segment of WorldCanvass will explore the assumptions behind gender and identity and will help us understand how they affect us in terms of how we feel about ourselves and also the ways that others see us. So I'm very pleased to introduce my guests in this segment we're calling Navigating Identity. Nicole Nisly is professor in the University of Iowa Department of Internal Medicine and co-director of the UIHC LGBTQ Clinic. Nicole, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Next to her is Georgina Dodge, the Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Vice President of the University of Iowa, also Title IX Coordinator here at the UI. Welcome, Georgina.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Sara Riggs is our third guest. She's a library assistant at the University of Iowa Libraries, and we're very grateful to have you here, Sara. Thanks.
Thank you, Joan.
So, Nicole, as we mentioned, you're both a professor in internal medicine, and you co-direct the LGBTQ clinic. So could you give us some insight from a medical point of view as to how we should understand gender, sexuality, and identity?
Sure. So we can start with sex. So sex generally refers to what we call biological sex. So we learn in school about the X chromosome, the Y chromosome that define genetically the male-female side of humanity. Now, when someone is born, that health provider or in some places a friend or someone that is attending birth will look at that baby and define that baby as a boy or a girl. That definition will later become legal, and that is a sex assigned at birth. So that person, that little baby or child, would then be defined or assigned on their birth certificate as a male or female. In some cases, due to medical or genetic conditions, you may not be able to tell if that baby is a boy or girl, and some tests need to be made. But at the end, they're defined or assigned as female or male. On the other hand, gender is that sense of self as a maleness or femaleness. Generally, about the age of 2 or so, that little baby will self-define as a boy or a girl. In most cases, that sex assigned at birth, male or female, matches that little child's definition, self-definition of gender. And so that person would then be a boy when they were assigned male at birth. In some cases, that is not a match. And so that person, gender identity is different, and it may be opposite, or it may be different than that initial definition. So that is commonly known as a transgender person or a gender non-conforming person. Now, it turns out the research shows that it's very limited, but it shows that about 0.5% of the population identifies as gender non-conforming. And you can see people that identify as gender non-conforming in all populations from all cultures, going back in history and current history. It turns out that some people's identity as a gendered person may not necessarily fit on one of the two binary of male or female. Some people really identify their gender not necessarily fitting in there. It may not necessarily be in the middle, maybe more towards the female or more towards the male, but encompassing both of them. And some people identify then as gender nonconforming or gender queer or third gender, and you hear some more about that as the program goes. I want to say a little bit of a word about sexual orientation as different than gender identity. And I think one of the ways that I thought would be easy for all of us to recognize or maybe identify that is to use maybe some famous personalities. So I'd like to point out Portia and Ellen DeGeneres and Portia de Rossi, which are a couple. So Ellen identifies as a cisgender woman who is also lesbian. And I'd like to talk a little bit about cisgender in just a minute. Her spouse identifies as also a cisgender woman who identifies as a lesbian or gay. Now, when you look at their expression or the way they dress, they carry themselves, or their gender expression, one of them, Ellen, maybe expresses herself maybe in a more masculine way. And as Portia expresses herself in a more feminine way. And both of them have the same gender identity, which is cisgender woman. They have a similar sexual orientation, which is lesbian or gay. Now, if you look at a different person, Laverne Cox, which is one of the actresses in the show Orange is the New Black, her sex assigned at birth is male. Her identity is a transgender woman. And so that is her identity as a person, so her gender and her sex. Now, so then you can see the difference between sexual orientation, which is someone's attraction to another human being, and the identity they call that. So as an example,
so wrong. Have you ever been to
sorry, my dear, we need to finish the program. Maybe you can talk in a little bit, okay?
But I find you very wrong.
So when we created the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning clinic, our goal was to be able to create a space that was welcoming and safe for people that identify in their gender as, a woman or a man, a cisgender woman, cisgender man, or transgender man or woman, or someone that identifies as a gender queer or a third gender. I would like to very briefly just describe what cis and trans mean. Those are Latin terms, and cis meaning on the same side, trans meaning on the opposite side. They're typically used in like chemistry, biochemistry, or so to define in geometrically where the compounds are in the same side or the opposite side. So if one assigns sex at birth, say me, I was assigned female at birth and my identity is a woman, so I'm on the same side, so that means I'm a cisgender woman. So.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, because I know that is a term that I've come across sometimes, and I wasn't sure exactly what was meant by it. So before we move to Georgina, we have mentioned that there is a clinic here at the hospitals that you and Katie and Bork, whom we'll hear from later, started a few years ago. And tell us briefly why it was important, do you think, to set that up?
Yes, so actually it was inspired by some of the University of Iowa students. We attended a lovely week-long seminar called Trans Collaborations, and specifically I attended a particular day when they're talking about healthcare, and I heard the students share how difficult and challenging it may be felt to them to find a physician where they felt that they could talk about either their sexual orientation, their sexual behavior, their gender identity, and also to help with transition. So some folks that identify as transgender, in order for them to transition to the gender that they identify with, they may need some help with hormones or surgery. And so we heard that that was very difficult to find physicians that had that safe space. And so we created the clinic with many colleagues. We have some of our colleagues from pharmacy and counseling and surgery and dermatology, speech therapy, many other places that help provide that care that is comprehensive to help people in their transition to the gender that they identify with.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. So you've been listening to Nicole Nisly, and next to her is Georgina Dodge, also with our university here and university administration. And so you have many high-level tasks here at the university: Chief Diversity Officer, Associate Vice President, and you also coordinate Title IX. Can you remind us all what Title IX is and what it means, particularly to people who might identify as LGBTQ?
Title IX focuses on gender equity. So you cannot be discriminated against on the basis of your gender. And that is however you define gender. As you can imagine, when Title IX first came around back in the 70s, that meant it was specifically aimed at protecting the rights of women on university campuses and within public forums. And now it's become a little bit more complicated, as Nicole has pointed out so well. And so we are going to be watching some of the laws conform to our expectations of what gender might be.
What are some of the, in your role here on campus, you're obviously very concerned about diversity, all kinds of diversity. What are some of the principal areas you're working on, and you and others within the university community and the Iowa City community are working on to assure a safe environment and resources available to anyone who feels need to either discuss their own identification issues or the way they might be treated by others in the public. What are we doing as a university?
We're doing a lot, and I just have to start out by saying this is such complicated work because often it's very emotional work. And identity is not something that's locked in, whether it be gender identity or other types of identity. Our identity is constantly evolving. And we have students who are coming here and they have the opportunity to reinvent themselves. In other words, change the identity they may have carried the first 18 or so years of their lives and determine that they want to be someone else. And so that can bring about a lot of emotional distress as they try to grapple with that from their own perspective as well as from others. And the ways in which our identity get impacted by everything out there. I mean, we often don't think about that. We think that we define ourselves, but the old saying is that no person is an island. And indeed, we get so impacted by what others think of us, and that we get impacted by things that we may not even accept, such as the stereotypes that others may hold of us. Those impact our identities as well. And so it's a really complicated, messy area. And it really does take a village to help people work through some of the issues that might arise. And so we do have resources on campus as well as in the community, specifically for gender identity. There is a person within the Center for Diversity and Enrichment who works with students specifically. There is also the LGBT Resource Center, as well as the LGBT Faculty and Staff Alliance, which formed in 1990. I believe it may be the oldest such alliance in the country on a university campus. We also do a great deal of programming and outreach. As some of you have undoubtedly heard, in 2013, we decided to do a little more aggressive outreach, and so we included some questions on our admissions form. That became it attracted a lot of national attention. And in fact, I actually have a phone message from another university that wants to talk with me about how we did that and what consequences we faced, because this is still an evolving area, and people are still afraid of what impact it may have on their institutions. So one of the reasons that we did include a question asking if the incoming student affiliates with the LGBT community is so that we could let people know about resources. One of the things that we found in surveying our students is that they didn't know where to go. And particularly for students who might be re-identifying themselves when they arrived here at the university. So they did not have a group of people to call on, a group of colleagues. And so we occasionally send out emails with resources. If we have new information about programs, we send that out to everyone who indicates on the form that they're affiliated with the LGBT community. And I do need to add, and I think it's important, that that information is protected information. Until such time as the federal government enacts the laws that need to be enacted to ensure that there is adequate protection for people who declare their gender identities or their sexual orientation, we need to make sure that we protect that information. And so we'll send information about scholarships, programming, other types of resources that are available on campus, and just encouraging messages as well. And I do want to mention one of the programs that we have on campus that Sara is very involved in and that we're particularly proud of, and that is our Safe Zone initiative. And Safe Zone is a program that is designed to help everyone in the campus community develop the tools so that they can be an effective ally. There are two parts to Safe Zone, and the first part may be for those who don't feel prepared to identify themselves as an ally, but want to have some knowledge of the LGBT community. And so it's been a highly effective program. I brought the numbers with me. I think since the program became an initiative in 2010, we've trained 904 students, faculty, staff, and community members. And approximately 330 of them are active Safe Zone members. Yeah, so we're very proud of that.
Yeah, so help me understand, if someone comes to the training and they stick with it, becoming an ally means what? It means that you step up if you see something happening to someone else?
Absolutely. You can even receive a placard that identifies your workspace as someplace that's welcoming, in case, and particularly for young students who come to campus and may need someone to talk to, may need someone to connect them to a larger community or provide them with resources.
Well, now that you have some experience with this admissions question, I'm interested to know whether you've been able to determine what proportion of students who might answer that question positively actually do give any sort of answer to it at all, not perhaps knowing how that information would be used, or not wanting to share something with their parents who might look at the admissions form before it's mailed in.
And we do realize that that is an issue. So we do have a very small percentage of students who have answered the question affirmatively. You know, but as we figure with increased outreach and changing public perception, we expect that to continue growing. And we also recognize that some students who are checking yes may not identify themselves as LGBT, but want to be themselves allies. And so we think it's important to keep them in the loop and provide them with information.
Wonderful, great. Well, thank you. So that was Georgina Dodge, and now we're going to go to Sara Riggs at the far end. And Sara, I know that in addition to what Georgina has said here, you've long been active in the LGBTQ movement, and it's personally important to you. And you also prepared really wonderful commentary for the Press Citizen yesterday, many people may have read, called Moving Past Gender. And why is this issue so important to you?
Well, I came out in 1991, and I came out as a lesbian then, and then eventually said, well, maybe I'm bisexual. And it wasn't until I started doing Safe Zone as an employee of the university that I was like, well, I'm just queer because there's not just two genders, and I'm not just attracted to only men and women. I'm just attracted to a person, period, you know. So then I just said queer. There was a lot of activism on my part as far as marriage equality, and of course Iowa is one of the first states that became a state that allowed same-sex marriage. But I think when I do these Safe Zone trainings for the University of Iowa, I start to see that gender identity, and that is the place we need to start moving, because it affects every single one of us, every single child that's born, and homophobia doesn't even seem to always be homophobia. It's more a genderism, and it's hate against you not matching the gender that you're presenting, or so a lot of hate crimes, a lot of hate towards people can be more about their gender than about if they're gay or not. So.
Have there been, I'll perhaps turn to you with your work at the clinic, have you had patients who have had gender violence committed against them?
So there is a high prevalence of people that identify as gender nonconforming in shelters, as an example, because their families no longer wish to associate with them. And that's a story that I find very sad, that I heard many times in my work as a physician, is to recognize that because of that identity, they have suffered neglect or violence or abandonment.
Yeah.
And so there's also a high risk of suicide because of some of the barriers that Sara is talking about, that people face sometimes by losing their loved ones and sometimes by just that continued microaggression, such as getting a job, getting a place to live, or discrimination because one identifies at a gender that does not match that sex assigned at birth.
Right. Well, so Sara, I know that you're also a mom. You have kids in this school system. And among the things that you mentioned in the article you wrote were the need for restroom facilities from the youngest grades on up.
Right, and
We
I think that's
recognize this.
citywide, right,
Yeah.
or nationwide, or worldwide even. But I just joined the equity committee for the school district, and I'm going to be working with Kingsley Botchway on some school district things for equity for gender, especially. So hopefully we can move on all the buildings,
Right.
and hopefully the university also moves on that.
Well, I know there was good news this last week or so when Iowa City as a community was given a very high ranking among cities nationally for a welcoming environment for LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
And there is the Campus Pride Index, and at the University of Iowa, we have a 4.5 star rating out of 5 possible. So we've done fairly well.
Yeah.
And we know there's always room for improvement, but we are certainly striving to do better. And the point that Sara was just talking about having accessible restroom facilities, that's something we've had a lot of conversation about. And what's important to realize is that even though we focus on one particular identity, such as gender, when we do good things for one group, it's going to help everybody. And that's what we have to keep in the back of our minds. And even as we've looked at developing restroom facilities that are gender neutral, we're finding that it's very helpful for someone who has a disability who wants someone else who may not be of their same sex or gender to accompany them into the restroom to help them. So we understand that, the rising tide lifts all boats, so to speak.
Yes.
So the University of Iowa has been recognized as a leader in the Health Equality Index, which is similar to what Georgina recognized as a leader in LGBTQ health. As the Iowa River Landing facility was created, that was one of the dialogues that we had with our leaders and colleagues is about restrooms. And so the restrooms at Iowa River Landing are designated as restrooms. They are all gender inclusive.
Yes. Wow. Wow. Terrific. Any concluding remarks you'd like to make? Maybe the one thing you would like to see happen in the next year, the next 2 years? Is there one thing that could make a great difference?
Well, mine is kind of big and idealistic, to be quite honest with you. I just wish we would let people embrace their identities and understand that identities are so fluid and that we move amongst them and between them. And if we could just learn to accept people for who they are at a particular moment in time, it would be a much better world.
Yeah. Not sure we could end any better place than that. That sounds great. So, well, thank you, Sara Riggs and Georgina Dodge and Nicole Nisly. Thank you so much for joining us for this first part of a 3-part series on gender and identity. This is WorldCanvass. We hope you can join us for the next segment where we'll be talking to a couple of individuals about their own personal stories navigating their identity. So thank you for being with us for this first program. All WorldCanvass programs are available on YouTube, iTunes, UITV, and the International Programs website, international.uiowa.edu, and you can learn more about Film Scene at icfilmscene.org. So I'm Joan Karen for International Programs. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time. Good night.